maybe I am unique in this regard, but I do not like interruptions. I like to have my life planned out and looking forward, and things go exactly from point A to point B as I expect, desire, and prefer. Are you anything like me? So let me tell you something my family does. Every summer we go to the same place in the Berkshires, do the same activities, follow the same schedule. Maybe we'll go to this ice cream place instead of this one this year, but otherwise things are very scheduled and very clear. So I want to tell you about a moment that happened during my very scheduled, non-interrupted, exciting trip. We were driving to a water ski show. Have you ever been to a water ski show? I hadn't either. So this was new, and we were excited to put it on the trip itinerary this year. And we're all excited. We put it in the map. There's good weather. It's going to be great. You can get hamburgers there and hot dogs, and we're all excited. You can even get milkshakes. And we're driving down the road, and we look, and there's a cute little ice cream place. And we think, oh, isn't that a cute little ice cream place? And a car in front of us turns into the cute little ice cream place, and so we slow down. And then what happens? We get rear-ended. And suddenly, we are not on our way to the water ski show. We are now sitting out on the highway, the public road, in a place that we've never been before, not knowing what was happening. We were interrupted. Have you ever had a moment like that where you're expecting life to be one way and suddenly you face interruptions? It's not what we prefer to happen. It's not what we wish to happen, but it certainly happens. And you know what happened? Did we make it to the water ski show? We did not. We missed it. Today's text, we're going to see Elijah is the prophet. We've been following him for the whole fall. We'll continue doing that. He's going to face an interruption of his own. Life is going to suddenly differ. Things are not going to be expected. Here's what happened the last couple weeks. We have this guy in a time where there's been a divided kingdom in the Old Testament. And this guy, Elijah, he has a specific role. What's his role? It's to be God's prophet. What does a prophet do? A prophet has God's words for the people. And specifically, he's going to make it clear that the kingdom of Israel under this guy, Ahab, needs to make some changes. They've been serving this god Baal because of the influence of a place called Tyre. It's a rich little place with a king Ethbal. His name means with Baal. And so now the kingdom under Ahab has been much too much like Tyre. So Elijah came in and he declared there would be a drought. There has been a drought. We've had all these wonderful adventures where God has provided for him. And for 3 years, there's been a drought that's led to famine in the land. God is taking care of Elijah, but everybody else is in a pretty difficult time. And now it is time that Elijah is going to go to the king and declare the end of the drought. And so for Elijah, the plan is just let's head over to King Ahab, let him know that the drought is over, and that's the deal. But he's going to face an interruption. Because rather than simply going there, he's going to run into, on the road, this random guy named Obadiah. And Obadiah is part of the king's court. He's actually the major domo of the king. What does that mean? If you've ever seen Return of the Jedi and you remember Jabba the Hutt, Bib Fortuna was the major domo. If you don't, that just means he was an important official in the king's court, and he had a role. And Elijah is now going to run into this guy, Obadiah, and we're going to see how both of them deal with interruptions. On one hand, Elijah is going to handle it one way, and Obadiah is going to have a very different take on the situation. Because here's our central question we want to ask. How do we face interruptions? How do we face interruptions? When we face interruptions, are we like Elijah who say, wow, God has appointed something. God is going to work through my interrupted schedule. Or are we going to live like Obadiah? You know what Obadiah's response is to the interruption? Oh no. Oh no. Do you ever have a panicker in your house? Anybody married to a panicker? Anybody is the panicker? Oh no. Interruption happens, and Obadiah is going to offer the model on what not to do. He's going to start thinking, this is going to be the end of my life. The interruption is going to lead to me dead. And he's going to really overly panic instead of dealing with it appropriately. Because here's our central thing that we're going to learn from Elijah today. God gives us purpose. He uses our interruptions, and how we live matters. Let's say this together. God gives us purpose. He uses our interruptions, and how we live matters. Wait a second. I thought the whole point of church today was, how do I avoid interruptions? How do I come to church and ensure that interruptions never happen in my life? And in my workplace, all I do is get promoted, right? And in my marriage, every single conversation is amazing, perfect. It's like the rom-coms without the middle section where everything goes terrible. It's just the good part and the end part of the rom-com, right? Or, wait a second, I thought my parenting was going to be, how do I sit with my kids, get them to say the sinner's prayer at age 2, and then be pastors by 4, and we change the world together, right? That's not reality for most of us. And for most of us, God gives us purpose. He uses our interruptions, and how we live matters. Actually, for all of us, God gives us purpose. Raise your hand if you've ever had your life interrupted, right? We're all united on that. Let's look at the purpose God gives us. So we're in this wonderful story. If you've got your Bibles, open up to 1 Kings chapter 18. We're going to see some really great stuff because Elijah's day is going to get interrupted. Later on in the 3rd year of the drought, the Lord said to Elijah, "Go and present yourself to King Ahab. Tell him that I will soon send rain." Elijah went to appear before Ahab. Elijah knew his purpose. Elijah knew his purpose. Elijah knew that his specific purpose in this part of his life was that there has been a drought. The drought has been caused because the people of Israel have believed that a fake water god could give them rain. And so God, speaking through Elijah, said, have fun. There's going to be no rain for a bunch of years, and let's see how helpful Baal is for you. Elijah's specific purpose is he needs to go and declare that the drought is ending. He's got to go before the king. Previously, he's run from the king because the king wanted to kill him, but it's Elijah's purpose to specifically go, to not be afraid, to head forward. Elijah is actually a man, a person of purpose. He knew his purpose, and he saw opportunities all over. So we had, last week he deals with a widow, and Elijah needs to eat during a famine, so God sends him the poorest person in the whole society to provide for him, a widow. The week before, Elijah was kind of homeless by a brook, and God sent him a raven to start feeding him. And so Elijah has learned to see God's purpose through everything. Our most basic question we can ask is the following thing. We start to ask this question: do I know that God has a purpose for my life? Do you ever go through life and wonder, hey, does God have a purpose for me? Hey, feels like I'm kind of floating through. Life is different than I was expecting. I see other people. We look around. Do we ever see the super Christians? And we see all the super Christians with their perfect lives, their perfect prayer lives, and we say, they're amazing. I'm not. My life is kind of a mess. God doesn't have a purpose for me. Well, he does. The most basic question we can ask is, do I know that God has a purpose for me? And if so, what? In Scripture, there are 4 things for every Christian. If you are a Christian, not the minister only, not the Sunday school teacher only, not the small group teacher only, every Christian has 4 purposes. Love God. In the Old Testament, it's the Shema, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Love neighbors, the people around us. Jesus is asked, who's my neighbor? Here's the little key. If you look at someone in your life and you wonder, is this person my neighbor? What is the answer? If you have to ask the question, is this person my neighbor? They are. Love God, love neighbors. Then Jesus, at the end of his ministry, gets a whole bunch of people together, and he tells them to make disciples. What is making a disciple? It's literally telling people about Jesus, being clear about it, having a relationship with them, and now investing in that person so that not only do I follow Jesus, but that person does as well. So there's part of our general purpose, and live a holy life. Live a life like God would want. Look at all the things around us and say, there's a lot of stuff I need to move away from. I want to live a life that is set apart for God. So every person, if you say, hey, does God have a purpose for my life? We all have a general purpose. Everybody hold up a 4 on your finger, okay? So we've all got this together. And then sometimes we have specific purposes too, a 5th finger. A specific purpose is, for example, imagine you're a mom. You can put your hand down. Imagine you're a mom and you have children. Part of your specific purpose is you live out your general purpose of loving God, loving neighbors, making disciples, and living a holy life through that additional thing of being a mom. Imagine that you're working at a convenience store behind the counter at 11 p.m. at night. You have a general purpose, love God, love neighbors, make disciples, live a holy life, and then you have a specific purpose. From my position where God has put me, I can do these things. Imagine that you are unemployed. Have you ever thought of unemployed people? Unemployed people are not without purpose. They have God's general purpose. And then I'm in a place where I'm looking for work. I'm trying to connect. And I can actually live out my general purpose specifically during the job hunt as I'm interviewing. Rather than viewing people that I'm interviewing with antagonistically or us versus them, I can be praying for those people and see that God places me in specific things. Elijah daily has this question, and I'd love you to write this down. Lord, what do you have for me today? What would life be like if we started saying, Lord, what do you have for me today? As a prophet, he had to not only speak hard truths, hey, follow God, and if you don't, there's going to be a drought. He also got to tell encouraging things. Hey, if you follow God, good things will happen. Hey, the drought is coming to an end. It's important that we understand our purpose. It's important, especially as we face interruptions, we have to know what's been interrupted in the first place. I chatted with a pilot recently. Anybody here fly planes? I chatted with someone who's not raising their hand. This person told me all about flying and piloting. Now, when you drive a car, we never face interruptions, do we? No, never, right? Do you think pilots do? Oh yeah, pilots face all sorts of interruptions. In fact, think about it. The only reason you need a human pilot is because interruptions happen. Think about that. Otherwise, you could program a computer. The computer could take the plane off, fly the plane in the air, and land it. Why do you need the pilot? Interruptions. There's things that happen. Sometimes a duck hits your plane in midair. A human pilot needs to deal with the interruption appropriately. Sometimes you have someone in the back seat of your single-engine plane, and you know what that person has happened to them? They get a little motion sick. Have you ever ridden in a little teeny plane? Little teeny plane? Can sometimes those people in the back, we cannot quite have the stomach for it. And the pilot has to figure out, how do I appropriately deal with the interruption? Life is like that. A lot of our purpose is lived out in our interruptions. And so a question we start to ask is, do I know that God has a purpose for my life? I'll ask you this. Do you know that God has a purpose for your life? Okay. Now, if you're clear on that, great, because there's a couple ways we can look for purpose. We can look out to others in culture, and we can look and say, hey, there's stuff going on out there. Maybe that provides me purpose. It doesn't. We can look into ourselves. We can say, hey, if I know the real me, I'll have an opportunity to really know my purpose. Well, the real me is just sinful and falls short and powerless, so not helpful. Where do I look for purpose from? Up to God. Not out to culture, not into self. Up to God. I invite you. Think about what your purpose is, that general purpose. It's to love God, to love my neighbors, to make disciples, live a holy life. And then I can live it out specifically. If I have a specific workplace, I can do certain things. You see a pastor preaching to you. I have a specific role that I can do. Not every Christian has to be a pastor. You see people who are parents. Not every Christian has to be a parent. You see people who are in Christian marriages. You don't have to be in those, but when we're in specific places, we want to specifically live out our purpose. So God gives us purpose. When we're facing interruptions, He uses the interruptions. We're not necessarily excited for them. You have this moment where Elijah's getting ready to go talk to King Ahab. What's he going to declare? What's over? Something is coming to an end. The drought. Rain is coming. And so now Elijah's got to get over to King Ahab. And let's see what happens. As Obadiah was walking along, he saw Elijah coming toward him. Obadiah recognized him at once and bowed low to the ground. "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" he asked. "Yes, it is," Elijah replied. "Now go and tell your master, Elijah is here." How Elijah viewed interruptions meant that he didn't panic when he saw a member of the king's court. Elijah was a fugitive. He was a wanted man. If he would have just panicked, he could have saw Obadiah and freaked out and been all concerned and gone, "Chicken Little, sky is falling in." Because the truth is Obadiah could have arrested him and made his life really difficult. Obadiah was just trying to do his life and do his things. And Elijah now runs into this guy who's part of the king's court. Now, Obadiah, like everyone, is a little more complicated. He's actually been a believer of the Lord. He's been hiding prophets and doing all sorts of things. But Elijah doesn't know all that. Elijah simply sees a guy from the evil king's court on the road. And if you notice, he doesn't panic. He's learned to see interruptions the right way. I want to give you two words: disappointment and his appointment. If we change our perspective, when we have disappointments, when we have interruptions, notice the letter of disappointment. D-I-S-A-P-P-O-I-N-T-M-E-N-T. Disappointment. Everybody say disappointment with me. Okay. If you change your perspective in one letter, when we face a disappointment, Elijah is trying to head to King Ahab, and he meets the king's helper on the road. It's disappointing, but instead, if he changes his perspective to say, "Wow, this is a problem," if he says, "Hey, this is of God," God will use this as an opportunity. It becomes his appointment, God's appointment. If we start to shift our perspective on that, we're not going to see disappointments. We see things as God's appointment, his appointment. Now, Obadiah doesn't, because in verse 9, this is what Obadiah says: "Oh, sir, what harm have I done to you that you are sending me to my death at the hands of Ahab?" Obadiah had not learned to see the interruptions as God's appointment. We get into our lives where things happen, we're on vacation, we get rear-ended, and we don't see them as his appointment, we see them as disappointment, interruptions, frustrating. This happens in our workplace. We expect the day is going to be one day, and something happens, and we're disappointed about it, right? What we're invited to do is, if we start to change our perspective, the interruptions that happen, the disruptions that happen, God uses those. And if we start to say, "Hey, I'm a Christian." What does it mean that I'm a Christian? I love Jesus. What else does it mean? Because I have a different perspective and a view. I don't have to live moment to moment, but I get to say, "Wow, I had this plan for my day, and I wanted X, Y, and Z to happen. Those aren't happening. Maybe the interruption, God can use it. Maybe I can live out my purpose of loving God, loving my neighbors, making disciples, living a holy life. Maybe I can, in fact, not maybe, but I can say, God has appointed this interruption for a reason. He's using it, and I can be part of the solution." My Uncle Dan one time met a guy named Alan at a birthday party. And have you ever met someone at a birthday party who you'd never met before, and suddenly they were telling you their whole life story? And you didn't ask for their whole life story. It's just, here it is. And you're expecting, what do we do at a birthday party? If you're in your 50s, 60s, you expect to kind of mingle, right? You walk around, you say hi, you chat over here, you grab a little cheese sandwich, you come over here, you get the little, the hot dogs, little teeny hot dogs that are only at birthday parties of, Baby boomers, right? I love those. Invite me to your birthday party because I love the teeny hot dogs. You expect to be able to just go from thing to thing, but then suddenly a guy named Alan is telling him his life story. Now, if my Uncle Dan had simply viewed this as a disappointment, what would he have done? Grabbed his wife Puffy and tried to manufacture an excuse? There's a movie from my generation called Garden State. Here's a little pro tip. Ready? If you're ever in an uncomfortable situation at a party and you want to get out of it, pull your ear. It's from the movie Garden State. It's a little symbol. It's a little signal to say, hey, I want to get out. But Uncle Dan didn't do that. He sat and he talked to this guy, Alan. And Alan had had a lot of interesting things in his life. He had a lot of disappointments. He had a lot of things that he had done in his life where he felt judged. He felt like he had a really bad past. And he had struggled with any notion of faith because Alan was the kind of person who saw God as totally loving and totally forgiving, but Alan was unwilling to forgive himself, to let himself go. He was unable to see, hey, God would want to extend that to me and I could accept it. And so my uncle, being my uncle, sat there at the birthday party as all of the life story was coming out, and he at first didn't quite know what to say, because truthfully, when someone just randomly tells us their life story the first time we meet, do we know what to say? Not necessarily. But my uncle listened, and he tried to really actively listen. Do you ever have that thing where someone's talking to you and you're, instead of thinking of what you're going to say next, their lips are moving and you're conjuring up what my response is? He actually listened. And when Alan was done talking, he said, okay, you're having a hard time dealing with the things that you can remember about your past. My Uncle Dan is a big Southern gospel fan. So he said, over on the way over here, I was listening to a song called What You Can't Remember. And here's how the song goes. It says, Lord, help me forget what you can't remember. Lord, help me see that you see beyond my past. When my memory burns with pain, pour your grace on the embers, and please help me forget what you can't remember. And my Uncle Dan said, hey, why don't you listen to this Southern gospel song? And just when you do, just pray and say, God, would you help me see that you have wiped my past clean and you've forgiven me, and there's things that you've just moved beyond that help me move beyond it too. And he said, also, here's my phone number. Why don't you keep in touch with me? So about once a week for a while, this guy Alan and my Uncle Dan kept in touch. And eventually this guy Alan also was terminally ill, so he died. And my Uncle Dan was invited to the funeral. And at the funeral, the pastor got up and he said the following thing. Alan always had this life where he really was fixated and focused on all the things in his past that were frustrating, that he felt judged on. And then one time he had this random interaction at a birthday party with this guy Dan. And this guy Dan didn't seem to necessarily know what to say, but he traded numbers with Alan, and he sent him a gospel song. And for the rest of his life, Alan listened to the gospel song once a day. And he met with me, the pastor, and he gave his life to Jesus. And it made all the difference in his life. Because my Uncle Dan had learned to not see disappointments as interruptions and problems. He had changed his perspective. He had embraced his purpose, even at a birthday party, can we still live out our purpose? Even when someone is dumping their whole life story on us, can we still live out our purpose? Even when we want to run away screaming and have our own whatever, and we're like, I don't want this right now, we can say, okay, this interruption, this disappointment is actually his appointment. And so the question that we ask is, how do you view interruptions? Disappointment? I can't believe I'm inconvenienced. I can't believe we're doing this right now. Or his appointment? God is working through this situation, this interruption, and I have a chance to live out my purpose, to love God in this interruption, seeing it as his appointment, to love my neighbor in this interruption, to see his appointment, etc. How do you view interruptions? When we face interruptions, let's remember this. God gives us purpose. He uses our interruptions. and how we live matters. How do you think Elijah responded to the Obadiah interruption? What do you think? Do you think he threw rotten eggs at the guy? Do you think he yelled at him? Do you think he said, I can't believe that you're here and this is just totally destroying everything? No, he responds this way. He says, I will present myself to Ahab this very day. And you could say, what? The concern that Obadiah had was that Elijah was just going to poof away, vanish, and that Obadiah would be left holding the bag. Elijah says, you can trust me. I'm a man of integrity. I have purpose. I see this interruption as divinely orchestrated. It's his interruption. It's God's interruption, not mine. It's his appointment. And so therefore, I give you my word. I will present myself to Ahab this very day. So Obadiah went to tell Ahab that Elijah had come, and Ahab went out to meet Elijah. Integrity is the quality of being both morally upright in word and action. Have you ever met someone who talked a really good talk, and you chatted with them and you're like, that person's an amazing person of integrity, but maybe the rest of the life's work wasn't there and their life was separate? Or maybe you met someone who just lived a really good life, but they didn't seem to talk about it very much, and maybe the talk was out of compliance with everything else. Integrity is both. Integrity is living morally in a right way with my words, living morally in a right way with my actions. If you remember before, I told you a story at the very beginning about how we were driving to a water ski show, and what happened? Got rear-ended. Let me tell you how the story ended. So we got rear-ended and we missed the water ski show. Why did we miss the water ski show? Because a rookie state trooper was on the job, and the stop, instead of taking about 7 minutes, took about 90 minutes. But during that 90 minutes, first of all, the rookie state trooper lived with incredible integrity. He paused and he really slowly, I would say he almost pastored the situation. He checked in with my family and I. He checked in with the neighbors because this happened in front of someone's house. He checked in with the people at the ice cream stand on the other side of the road. He checked in with the guy who rear-ended us. And he went really slow, but he was just really sweet, and we kind of wondered, is this guy a Christian? Probably was, because of the way he was living in that situation. Then the guy who rear-ended us, what do you think his response was? He was probably blaming us, right? I'm completely at fault. I am so sorry. This was horrible. I want you to know, I take full responsibility. I will not contest any of it. I'm totally sorry that this happened. Is your family okay? Are your kids okay? That was his whole perspective. Then the neighbors come out. And you know who the neighbor is? He's the retired fire chief of the town. And he comes out, and he's got his daughter Bailey. And you know what Bailey is? A college student and a volunteer firefighter. Bailey comes out with toys, water bottles, and snacks. And for the next hour, Bailey and my kids are playing on her front lawn. And what has gone from an awful situation has become not the water ski show. We still missed it. We were still disappointed that we missed the water ski show. But for getting rear-ended and having a rookie state trooper take 90 minutes, everybody lived with integrity. I sat and thought about that, and truthfully, my wife and I responded this way. When we immediately got rear-ended, first thing we did is we asked everybody if they were okay. They were. And then we had a prayer, and we said to the kids, hey, how we respond to this really matters. You've never been in a car accident before. Everybody's okay. Our faith doesn't just matter at church. It matters when we get rear-ended. And it was this wonderful opportunity, not that we wanted to happen. We still missed the what? The water ski show. But it became this interruption, this not disappointment, but his appointment moment. And truthfully, anybody who's willing to live with integrity in front of my children, I'm all here for it as a parent. Ruby and I sat at a hot dog stand this past week, unrelated story, and I said, Ruby, I want to always be the kind of dad who, when I mess up, because I do, I'll always say sorry to you and I'll ask you for forgiveness. And so how we live matters. How we respond to interruptions matters. Elijah lived with integrity. He was as confident as Obadiah was fearful. Do we make excuses when interruptions happen? Or do we look for the opportunity to live out our purpose, to see how God uses the interruption, and to live with integrity? I want to end with a story about a guy named Artaban. There's a wonderful 19th century short story novella. It's kind of in that length where it's somewhere between 80-some pages long. It's called The Other Wise Man. And The Other Wise Man is a story by Henry Van Dyke. Of course, there's generally believed to be three wise men with the three gifts. And so Van Dyke writes about this fourth wise man. His name is Artaban. And Artaban's all excited because he has a number of gifts. He has diamonds and rubies and a pearl of great price. And he's all excited because he, along with the other wise men, he's going to head down and he's going to see baby Jesus. He's going to honor the Christ child with his gifts. But then he helps somebody and he has to give away a gift. And he misses the caravan and he has to get supplies. And instead of heading with the three wise men, he embarks on what some of us would see as a misadventure. He gets incredibly lost. He goes to random places. And he's got his gifts that are intended for the Christ child. And at every interaction, he looks and he sees needs. And his purpose is to honor Jesus, to honor the Christ child. But he finds himself getting interrupted constantly. And rather than viewing this with a sense of frustration and defeat, he sees each interaction as an opportunity to honor the Christ child. And so he gives away some of the gifts. For 33 years, he's lost. He's interrupted. What was his goal? To go from home to the manger, to the Christ child. He finally shows up 33 years later at the cross without any gifts. But he's lived out his purpose. What was his purpose? Was his purpose specifically to take the gifts and to give them to the baby? No, his purpose was to be honoring to the Christ child, to be honoring to Jesus, to be honoring to God. And he saw that God used his interruptions to bless and to help other people. When we face interruptions, let's remember what Elijah learned. God gives us purpose. He uses interruptions, and how we live matters. It's interesting, this past week, I may have had my most interrupted week of all time. Have you ever had a week where you feel like you have a schedule and nothing happens? On my to-do list, almost none of the things got done because interruptions started happening over and over and over. When I look at the results of this past week for me, did I accomplish everything? No. In fact, tomorrow on my day off, I'm going to have to, when my dad gets back, he and I are going to run some errands and get some things done that didn't get accomplished last week. But I look at it and say, did I use the interruptions of my week to glorify God? And often, most weeks, like any of us, do we do it perfectly? But this past week with my interruptions, I actually sat there and thought, we didn't get everything accomplished, but we are honoring and glorifying God. We're stopping giving appropriate attention. What my challenge for you this week is that there are going to be interruptions that you're going to face. There's going to be things that are going to be disappointing and frustrating, and you're not going to ask for them. You have a perspective choice. Are you going to view those as disappointment? Or are you going to say, God, maybe this is your appointment. Maybe how I live really does matter, and maybe I can live my purpose out. Let's say our phrase together. When we face interruptions, we can always live like Elijah. God gives us purpose. He uses interruptions, and how we live matters. Amen.